So now we move to the estate where I am right now. Is Castellare di Castellina. Castellare is the historical estate of our group, founded by Mr. Panerai in 1976. And we are in Castellina in Chianti. Castellina is a small village in the heart of Chianti Classico area. And from the beginning, we are following two very important philosophy in our production. The first is the respect for the environment, and the respect of the environment is symbolized in our label. With every vintage, we use different birds, all birds in danger in Chianti Classico area, because in the property we are not using pesticide or herbicide. So we have a organic idea of production. And the second important philosophy is the total respect for tradition. So Castellare is one of the few properties in Chianti Classico still making this beautiful wine without any international grapes. So this is 100% indigenous grapes. In fact, today we are the first wine of Castellare is Chianti Classico 2018, produced with 95% of Sangiovese. That is the clone, the name of the clone of Sangiovese we have in the property since the beginning, and 5% is Canaiolo. The wine is fermented in stainless steel and aged for 8 months in small French oak barrels of second time. So no new oak for this wine. Production of this wine is about 150,000 bottles. Prego.
So I think that anybody who has followed anything that I write knows that I'm a big fan of Chianti Classico as a region. I think it's one of the best terroirs in all of Italy for aging wines. And I've written a lot about this area, and we'll talk about your flagship wine at this estate, Sode di San Nicolò, in a few minutes. But the ageability of these wines, their ability to develop over time, is equaled by very few regions in the world. And I think in Chianti Classico, you know, it's always the entry level wine for most properties. And I think that it's, you know, what these wines offer is, as a group I'm talking about first, is the pedigree of a historic region, a very sort of food friendly approach, and the pricing at this category is always very affordable. You know, I mean, obviously different markets depend with duties and so forth, but relatively speaking, you know, so when I taste this wine, you have this acidity of Sangiovese. I think even if there's no new oak, to me, there's a little bit of sweetness in the wine, I think, still from the barrel. And I imagine that this is a lighter vintage. And so maybe that's why the oak is a little bit prominent at this time. And it's probably just been bottled too. One thing about Sangiovese based wines is that you're dealing with a variety that has a development like this in the bottle in the beginning. And so, whereas I think other varieties, like we had a Nero d'Avola, you know, I don't think in time Nero d'Avola, at least in my experience, has shown that it develops into a truly extraordinary like range of aromas and textures like Sangiovese does. But the wines are delicious like from the beginning, whereas in Sangiovese you have a more difficult variety to cultivate, to make, and I think you have to accept that in the beginning the wine can be a little, in Italian there's a great word for this, which is scorbutico, but I don't know how that translates in English. But the wines are, you know, it's like a book that you have to read twice, you know, or like a piece of music that you have to read twice, or a painting that you have to look at a little bit. It's not as immediate. It doesn't give you everything right away. You have to give something to the wine, just like you have to really concentrate if you want to truly appreciate an important work of art. So in this wine, I think right now it's in a little bit of a, you know, and it's just been shipped to me a few days ago. So I think it's still not settled yet. So, I mean, I don't think you're releasing this until June, you said. But, you know, it's got the classic Sangiovese red fruit, really bright acids, a medium weight vintage. And I'll be interested to taste it in a few more months.
Grazie.
Do you think it's the lighter vintage that gives the oak a little bit of prominence right now, or is it something else?
Yes, it's just because we are at the beginning. The wine is bottled a few months ago, so it's just in the moment of the evolution that the oak must be perfectly integrated, and also the tannins must be perfectly integrated. But for my personal opinion, considering the vintage, because it was not easy vintage 2018, I think this is a good expression of the territory, and of course, if we compare this vintage with 2017, is completely in a different level. But in this wine is more in the direction of the freshness. So this wine in a few more months, the wine will be very, as you said, food friendly. This is the perfect wine for any kind of food, starting from the appetizer to the dessert, because the acidity is perfectly clean the mouth for any kind of food.
So for people who are watching who may not know, maybe it'd be worth it to explain a little bit about 2018 and what was challenging about it, because,
Yeah.
Well, go ahead,
Yeah.
and then I want to say something at the end.
The 20, so we had two vintages, so 2017 and 2018, so completely at the opposite. No, 2017 was a very dry vintage. 2018, we had especially in the beginning of the season, we had a lot of rains. But fortunately, in Castellare, considering the morphology of the property, so we are located in a small valley with all around a sort of natural amphitheaters with the beautiful hills all around us, and the hills make a sort of kind of a natural protection, you know, of the entire vineyard. So also when normally we have storms in the area, so Castellare is quite protected from dangerous winds, dangerous storms, and and also we have a beautiful influence of the breeze coming from the Valdelsa Valley. So and then we have always a beautiful breeze, refreshing and making dry in the vineyard. So even when we have a very wet season, the beautiful air coming from the morning to the evening dry the grapes and make easy to work also in a wet conditions. So 2018 was not easy harvest, but again, considering the result we have now in the bottle, I personally, as a winemaker, I consider myself extremely happy.
I mean, the reason why I ask is over the years, I've been very lucky. I've had opportunity to taste a lot of wines from Chianti Classico, both at this level and then the more important wines. And if you taste the wines with age, it's almost always the wines from the cold year that will surprise you the most in aging. And so the wines can be a little bit nervous when they're young, and a little bit, in English we say taut, tense, wiry,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
nervous like this. But if I'm thinking about buying a wine that I want to age, I would always choose a wine that is from a colder vintage than a warmer vintage, for me personally, because I think in time the wines really surprise you. But you have to accept that in the early going, the wines can be a little bit nervous. And if you look at the articles that I've written, a lot of times after 10, 15, 20 years, I've given very good reviews to wines from vintages that were considered at the beginning not so good. And but the cold, which we've sort of lost now, because we consider this a cold vintage now, but it's probably like a normal vintage was a generation ago, maybe not that extreme, but we're so used to warm, early maturing vintages, and we're all young people. I can still think of myself as young. That we sometimes forget that a lot of the great wines that a lot of us have had a chance to taste from the 70s, 60s, or 80s, whatever, they were made in years that were colder, they were rainier than what has become normal today. And we also, as a culture, want instant gratification. We want to buy a wine today, open it tonight, and have it be like a life-changing experience. And sometimes it happens, but sometimes you have to be patient. And, I've written a lot of verticals on Chianti Classico wines, and almost always, very often, you find that the wines from the cold vintages in time are the ones that surprise you the most. So therefore, that's all I can share with you experience. But it doesn't bother me to find a wine that's nervous like that, because I think over time that's preferred to a wine that's already so open, because you know that the wine that's already open is going to have a shorter arc of development. And even if it ages in time, it won't be that interesting. It's going to be more monotone. Whereas wines like this, there's a lot of layers. It just needs time.
Yes, I totally agree with you. So vintage like this need to have a longer time in front of us to identify exactly the beauty of the wine.